Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeannie Kitchens with the Credential Engine. I want to welcome all of you to the first Credential Engine Application Showcase webinar. This will be one of multiple webinars that we will be hosting. With the next one will be coming up in January, and we'll tell you more about that in a moment. For those of you who just came into the webinar, we are going to record it, and all of the participants will be muted up until the Q&A period toward the end. Please do feel free to type comments or questions into the chat pod on the left, and we will do our best to address your questions. When we come to the end, toward the ends of the webinar, when we cover Q&A, if we don't have time to cover all the questions, we will follow up with you and try to answer your questions via a follow-up email, and that email will include a link to the archived webinar. So thanks again to all of you who are able to join, and a huge thanks to all of our presenters today, who I will be introducing in just a moment. The Credential Engine, by its mission, is promoting transparency and credential literacy in the marketplace to reveal the world of credentials and inform the public. And in order for the Credential Engine to meet this mission, an important aspect is to ensure that the technologies offered by the Credential Engine are helpful in basically opening up an applications marketplace. So we want to make sure that the credential and competency information that is vital to consumers and to a wide range of systems and software applications used across many domains is easily available to not only the consumers of the information themselves, but the systems and the software applications that could benefit from this information as well. As an example of an open applications marketplace, what we mean by that is, for example, human resources systems for recruiting or employee information or training information is a type, may have applications specific to employer services. Digital credentialing is an area, for example. Web content management systems, government credential and program directories, college and career planning systems are other examples. So there are many types of systems and applications that benefit from credentialing information. And what we would like to do through the Credential Engine technologies is ensure that these systems and applications can pull information in from the Credential Registry or push information into the Credential Registry as well. So today, as part of our application showcase, we'll begin with presentations that will cover the range of these various types of applications and systems. So for today's showcase, we'll have 6 presentations, and each presentation will cover a slightly different way of using credential and competency information from the Credential Registry. So we'll begin with AcademyOne, followed by Hive, CAS, Eduworks, Credly, Parchment, and SmartCatalog. Each presentation will be formatted similarly, and each presentation will last for approximately 10 minutes. Each presenter will talk about their company. They will talk about the problem that Credential Engine data can help solve. They'll talk about the proposed solution, describe how it works, and then the benefits to partners and stakeholders. And then future showcases will be planned for demonstration. So today's showcase will use PowerPoint presentations, and then on down the road, as the applications begin to integrate Credential Engine technologies, we'll come back and do some demonstrations as well. So for our first presentation, I would like to introduce David Madoff with AcademyOne, and David Moldoff is the Chief Executive Officer. And David, thanks so much for joining us. Can you go ahead and take it away?
Can you hear me, Jean?
I can, loud and clear.
Good. Thank you very much for the introduction and including AcademyOne. AcademyOne works and delivers solutions that resolve the complexities and challenges inherent in academic portability globally that impact degree completion. Our tools primarily automate the guided pathways that higher education institutions, colleges, universities publish and make available through admissions, processing, and so forth, so that students can follow a pathway to completion to earn a credential. The problem that I'm going to cover in this short presentation focuses on the workflow, assessing learning coming from an external source. It doesn't mean it's learning within the institution itself that's offering the degree or the credential. It's looking at the information from somewhere else. So it's tracking the comparability, what we call precedents, the decisions that are made by faculty, and it's reinforcing the rigor of review with a rubric, for example, that would follow the process and record that decision so that it could be reused later down the path with another learner. So in the use case, or the proposed solution, would enable us to use the registry to do a lookup instead of having to do the data gathering and the collection of all the information that would be made available from a source institution of their learning outcomes and their learning credentials or what they offer. We would use the registry as a source of information that would be authoritative to us so that we don't have to key it in. It would eliminate a lot of cost involved from annotating the information and recording it from an accuracy perspective, the quality control. All that would be eliminated because the institution that has the authority of that information is the one that publishes it to the registry. So it allows us then to record and recognize the learning sources from others and the credentials that they publish. And the most important part of this is also to track the changes, because what the registry will offer us is the ability to track the versions. So instead of just having a snapshot of one set of courses or one set of program offerings, we'll be able to track the changes dynamically in real time as those occur over time. So how it works, I'll start first really with the outcome of the process of assessment, which would be potentially a credit offer given to a learner, let's say before enrollment. So on the right is a screenshot of the credit offer, which shows a student potentially coming from an associate's degree in nursing, looking for a baccalaureate degree or a BSN degree in nursing at a target institution. So it's equating the associate's degree to, let's say, 60 credits of work and it's articulated and put on an offer letter to the learner so that they actually can make a commitment to enroll in that institution, assuming they would get that credit. So the screen on the right, again, displays that offer. In the lookup of this process, we would have to look up the institution that they came from. So the student would type in, for example, Philadelphia Nursing School, and as they type it in, starting characters, we would do a lookup to the registry to first find the institution that's available. And if it's in the registry, it could then be, we can then reference the credentials that they have under them. Once that information is entered in, the person can then proceed to select the associate degree in nursing. In the process of building their little portfolio, they can put their work experience in, they can put their degrees in, they can even put the subject courses that they have taken in as well. Because in the registry, that information will be accessible to us so that we could pull it without us having to key it in. Once they're complete, the learner would then submit their petition for assessment. And the process then goes into a queue, and from that queue, it's distributed to the faculty by course director or by people who are responsible for assessing that information that's been shared by the learner. and it goes through a workflow process that then steps through the process of assessing and validating and looking at the quality control of the commitments and the precedents that are decisions that are made. So the benefits to the partners and the stakeholders are that we can obviously leverage the registry that would enable us to build better solutions instead of us collecting all this data from our institutional partners. It would also provide learners and agents and administrators a wealth of information that they can compile it and build very rich portfolios of their prior learning or their learning they're planning to take in their guided pathway. And the registry version control would allow us to automate the process of validating that if something's changed, that was significantly changed, let's say the course description was changed or the learning outcomes were changed, we could then use that information in the registry to validate and select and alert people that they have to then reevaluate those precedents that were previously decided upon.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dave.
So for those of you participating, if you've thought of any questions or comments as you were listening to David talk about how he could use Credential Engine information as part of the services to his customers, just go ahead and type your questions or comments in the chat. And then again, toward the end of the webinar, we will have time for Q&A as well. Now I would like to welcome Matt G., CEO of Bright Hive. Matt, how's your audio? I can.
Can you hear me?
I'll go ahead.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Jeannie. So we're super excited to be able to present today because we're super fans of Credential Engine, and that's because at Bright Hive, what we do is we develop and deploy open source data integration tools. This is going to put everyone to sleep, but hopefully the rest of the presentations will wake you back up. But we focus entirely on public sector to create a more connected and interoperable data ecosystem that supports more outcomes-oriented service delivery. And so we think Credential Engine is one of the best expressions of how you go about an entire industry building out a linked data ecosystem around something as valuable as credential data. And where we work is essentially the data plumbing. We're glorified plumbers. And when we talk with a lot of the institutions that would like to get their data into Credential Engine, to keep everyone on their toes, you'll notice, I guess, in the conversion to the PowerPoint, we lost the first letter of each word. So you have to guess what the first word is throughout the presentation. We found that a lot of the credentialing institutions we've talked to in doing a lot of the low-level plumbing work have said, we'd like to get our data in there, but we've got one person, on our entire community college staff that works with the database that maintains credentialing level information, and they have 10 other big reports they have to do that are contingent on us actually getting funding next year. And so they feel often overburdened with numerous reporting requirements, and that can create a bottleneck to getting to the world where all these institutions have all of their credentials up to date and automatically registered in Credential Engine. And so what the problem is that we have gone out trying to solve is how do we lower the cost of participation in the Credential Registry for organizations while increasing the quality and timeliness and richness of the credentialing data that they provide. And the way we've gone about doing this actually over the last few years is to say, we can leverage existing administrative data already collected by states and education training providers themselves to more easily link that program participation data and credential attainment to future education and labor market outcomes using some open standards and in a way that will actually reduce the overall reporting burden and get more rich data into the Credential Registry. We've done that by essentially aligning three main efforts. One is an effort to create average labor market outcomes for individual completing programs by obtaining credentials through a multi-stakeholder effort with the Department of Labor and NASA and WDQC and the University of Chicago, being able to connect that with available programmatic data through a great data standard that came out of great work that Code for America did a number of years ago and has been led through something called the Open Referral Initiative. And lastly, be able to connect both of those to actual structured credential data from each of these institutions. And all of this in a toolkit that individual institutions and states can easily use to create this data and get it into the Credential Registry. And so how it works is over the last several years, we ran a technical working group with a bunch of states and providers to figure out what some of the low-level data piping problems were that they were running into, and found that if we could make it easier for them to get secure access to a few different data sources, to individual participant records, to program credential information, and to data that is housed at state agencies, be able to integrate that in a way that's secure and aware of its downstream uses, do some transformations of that data, and then expose it via an API that can be pushed to the Credential Registry as well as to other sources like iPads or DOL. Then a lot more institutions would be able to get connected outcomes data associated with their registered credentials on the registry. And so that's what we've gone about building. For example, one of the things that we have now deployed in a few states is the ability for individual institutions to be able to easily upload individual participant records or credential records or programmatic records and have those validated against what the expectation on that data is for its downstream use. It knows what the Credential Registry specification looks like and is able to very quickly give individual feedback at the field level to help get data in shape for registering on the Credential Registry. And we're able to do this in a way that's very, very portable across a bunch of different reporting standards by using something that the Open Knowledge Foundation put out called the Frictionless Data Standard, and provide individual states with the ability to monitor and see all the data that's flowing through this system in a way that allows them to know where there are some data quality issues. Ultimately, this is allowing individual institutions to essentially connect their data once and comply everywhere and get their data into the Credential Registry faster and have it actually connected with wage and employment outcomes, which we're really excited about. One of the states that's doing this right now is the state of Colorado, and this is allowing the state to, by early next year, have community dashboards that have credential level outcomes, to have third-party applications built for job seekers on top of that newly linked data, and have APIs that any new third-party developer can build on top of with the associated outcomes. All of this work is supported by a large ecosystem of folks who've committed to ingesting the data, a lot of national partners who are helping states actually implement it, research institutions who've contributed to a lot of the open source tools, and a broad set of funders who supported the work to date. So
thank you, Matt. Appreciate that overview. And I saw that Louis Soares put a question in there, and what we're going to do is toward the end of the webinar, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, and we'll be able to cover that question toward the end of the webinar, so thank you. Okay, so our next presenter, Robbie Rotson. Robbie, let me just check before I introduce you and make sure you're good with your audio. Oh, great. So I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
So Robbie Rotson is CEO of Eduworks and Principal Investigator for CAS, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Robbie.
Could you make Fritz the presenter? So thanks, and I appreciate that, and I just want to start by telling you a little bit about us and about the CAS project. So Eduworks does a few different things. Our expertise is in applications of machine learning and natural language processing, mostly to learning, education, and training. And also we are engaged in a fair number of funded research projects and in open source development. And one of our open source projects to which we're the initial contributor is CAS, which stands for the Competency and Skills System. And CAS has two parts. One is a competency repository, which allows competencies to be stored in a way that can be shared through persistent identifiers and URLs with other systems, and also stores the structure of those competencies. And then also the second part of CAS, which is going to play a role here, are competency profiles, which are records of what competencies an individual holds, and these are stored in a way with a number of other pieces of information, which we'll see as we go on and talk about the applications. So if you could just advance the slide there, you can see that these are connected with Credential Engine applications, and what I'd like to present today are some of the solutions that we see as being enabled by the Credential Engine data together with the repository, which is the CAS repository, is what's being used by the Credential Engine, and with some of the natural language processing and text analysis. So next slide, please. So the big problem that I think we're all trying to solve is to determine sort of what's next for me based on what I've done in what my educational history, my employment history, my experience. And from the employer perspective, of course, we're trying to solve the problem of who's next to hire. And both of these are currently have a lot of noise and very little signal. There are several factors that have arisen over the past few years, especially, that have to do with the ability to get these information from and degrees and certificates and credentials from multiple sources, all of which require a lot of local and tacit knowledge to interpret. And there's a great deal of frustration on everybody's part, ranging from individuals to career counselors to employers, to figure out how to make this work better. So the solution that I think we're all working towards, next slide, is to take this information that is currently local and hard to understand and to expand it, if you would, into a more granular information about a shared set of knowledge, skills, and abilities. So next slide, please. So this is what is so I'm going to present a couple of applications that use this data and that can be built on top of the Credential Engine. And in particular, I think in addition to answering the questions as to how we solve this bigger problem, also answer, I think what's a very important question is why put all of this competency data and these detailed data into the Credential Engine in the first place. So one of the things we've been working on over the past few years with a number of different organizations is this notion of career pathways and how do I find what's next, how do I find what's appropriate for me based on who I am, what I already know, and what I already can do. And the traditional way to do this is sort of as is pictured in this slide, where somebody has some degrees, some certificates, maybe some experience, and they're trying to figure out how prepared am I for the next thing. So this is the traditional way of looking at it. However, if we go down to the level of competencies, and click next slide, please, then we can see that there's more detail that's available thanks to the data that is in the Credential Engine that's being stored in CAS, and that is also being stored in these profiles that CAS can manage, so that we can start to match up and do what's often called a skill gap analysis as to what sort of skills are missing. So if we think about this, the traditional way of thinking about this now is in terms of stacked credentials, and if we now think of what those credentials mean at this very granular level, we can figure out how to do that stacking and also give the user of visibility into what they are. And one of the things you'll notice is that there are, of course, many more skills and knowledge and ability than are just listed here, but a lot of them are often soft skills and skills that need to be increased in level and in proficiency as time goes on. So this is the career pathway management, and I'd like to bring that back to the Credential Engine by talking about another closely related use case, which is how do you search for credentials and for things to do in the first place. So the way that that's done now is you would type in a keyword, for example, cybersecurity, and that would give you a list of credentials that are associated with cybersecurity. What we'd like to see is to personalize that. So if we click on that sort of search credential, we will see a slightly different view of the search results coming out of the Credential Engine. And you'll notice that this not only shows you the associated competencies, it has some scores there, and it also has an indication of what things you already have validated. And there are several other presentations today that talk about some of the related things about how that validation is done and recorded. But it also shows evidence. So if you click on the top evidence button there, you'll see that it can go expand a little bit and give you some data. Now this is the kind of data that we do store in the profile part of CAS, which includes things like when a particular assertion about someone's competency or skills was made, who made it, when it expires. There's also some other information like the confidence in it and other things that can be used by algorithms, by sort of intelligent algorithms to sort of make determinations as to what someone knows and with some degree of confidence. And of course, there's also aspirational things. So for example, the competency at the bottom, implement industry best practices, and that has some sort of score that indicates that you know some of it and you don't know some of it perhaps. And we'd like to learn a little bit more about that. So if you click on the detail button there, you'll see that it shows you some of the competencies that are related. Mostly in the real world, when competency frameworks are developed, they're sort of hierarchical. They contain high-level competencies and more granular things and skills that those require and so forth. And we can take advantage of that and start to show people a little bit more about what these things are composed of and give them a little bit more information at a level that hopefully still makes sense, and so that they can see what they know and what they're qualified for and where to go next. So these are the sort of applications that we see as enabling, and the question is, you know, what's sort of behind this? So if we go to the next slide, there's a few things that are needed in order to make this system work. So the first thing is that, and by the way, if you could just click once on this, then the first thing is that these degrees, courses, and badges that have to be associated with competency. So this is data that is being entered into the credential repository. The competencies are being stored in CAS. There's a pointer to them, and the purpose of entering these data is so that we can make these kinds of judgments and so that we can start mapping things in credential and competency-based education, career planning, and staffing, and so forth. One of the things that is important is that often the data that comes in there talks about a particular set of competencies or skills that an organization has created, and they're not the same, or they're similar but not the same as ones that other organizations have created. So one of the things that we have to do is to crosswalk them. So if you could just click once more. So this kind of mapping can be done manually, but in our experience, when we've been doing this in real life, we took, for example, some I think Army Scout competencies and tried to map those over to the credentials. And there's thousands of competencies in the Credential Engine. It really helps to have some sort of automated processes to do this. We have some applications of, as I said earlier, of text mining, machine learning, etc., that does this kind of work for us. And if you could just click once more, the next thing that we need to do, of course, is to analyze these and make some determination as to those scores, how that's done. Again, this is an intelligent system that can make use of the structure of the competency frameworks themselves, so that, for example, if somebody has let's say a ham radio license as a credential, then you might determine that they know something about electronics, and if, on the other hand, they don't know anything about electronics, you might determine that they're not likely qualified and have not qualified for a ham radio license. So there are these inferences that are being drawn. So it's not simply a matter of there's 10 competencies, somebody has three of them, so they're 30% prepared, it's a bit more complicated than that. Okay, and so finally, the bottom line, next slide please, is what are the real benefits? And so the bottom line here is that there's a lot of data that's being put in the Credential Engine, in the Credential Registry now, and a lot of that has to do with mapping things to competencies. And those are the data that are the underlying currency, if you will, that will enable a lot of things to happen. Career exploration, searching credentials in a personalized way, in a way that makes sense for each individual. And then also, on the other side, it's very important for staffing and recruiting. And one of the things that is, and all of that is great, but it probably can't be done today and certainly in the near future without using some sort of intelligent systems to do some of these crosswalkings for a couple of reasons. One reason is the sheer volume of the data. There's a lot of relatively low stakes. It's important, but not high stakes enough to justify manual intervention to create those kinds of mappings and so forth. And the other thing is that even once they're made, they have to be maintained, and that also is benefited greatly by an automated process. So that's
thank you, Robbie.
And I'll turn it back to
presentation, and it looks like you will have some questions toward the end here as well. So for those of you who are participating, please do feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. We love questions, and we will have time at the end to address those questions, so bring them on. And let me go ahead and move on to our next presenter. So I'd like to welcome Sarah Petrie, Director of Product for Credly. Sarah, can you go ahead and take it away?
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. So just to start out really quickly, Credly, for those we haven't talked to, is a technology platform really focused on making digital credentials portable and verified, to what Robbie was just talking about, really providing tools for training providers and educators of all different types, from higher ed to assessment providers, associations, and companies, to recognize in a data-driven and verifiable way the skills and achievements of their constituents. So the problem we were really focusing on in the context of Credential Engine was thinking about more of our non-traditional education and training providers, in addition to the typical higher ed and other institutional education providers. And the problem that they're facing is really to, one, to make their credentials more discoverable and more prominent to outside partners and customers, what the training is that they offer and the value of it. Also to establish their credibility. So in addition to being discoverable, having transparency and distribution to a lot of channels, including Credential Engine and Credential Registry, more folks will be able to see exactly what folks are recognizing and what the data is that lives behind that credential. And then last, to increase the value of their credentials. So their earners are always particularly important to stay engaged. Outcomes are something that we're continuing to drive towards. So in the context of Credential Engine and Credential Registry, this really means treating it almost like a marketplace. So being able to surface non-traditional credentials alongside other more traditional credentials. It really leverages that competency mapping to show the value of that in a way that people understand better or kind of meets them where they are. So in terms of a proposed solution, the first problem that we're really tackling is this discoverability piece and visibility, because that we see as the starting point for deriving the most value out of the Credential Registry integration in particular. And again, as part of this large ecosystem, we're thinking about how do we drive increased value of our digital credentials. So thinking about how this comes to life, within our existing platform, we have tools right now to manage all of the types of data that back up a credential and demonstrate its validity. And so what we want to do is to be able to add to these tools the ability to publish credentials directly into the registry itself. So this will take all of the data that lives behind Credly credentials and actually surface it in the registry itself. So this will be a great way to create a meaningful tie between these two systems. So there's discoverability even in both directions. And you can see even having the, in this case, ACE, American Council on Education, who's one of our big partners, we're actually able to really surface the credentials that are being issued by their endorsed companies, in this case AmeriCorps, and give a really rich picture of what this credential is all about. And of course, there's also going to be some really great value added on the Credly platform to be able to surface Credential Engine, both in the context of the credentials themselves, but also in a view where you can see an earner has received a badge like you see here. There's going to be an opportunity for anyone doing that to dig into the Credential Engine more and understand where this fits in the context of a broad ecosystem above and beyond even what they will be able to see on the Credly platform itself. So in terms of benefits to our partners and stakeholders, I think, again, to reiterate, it's all about outcomes for credential earners. So having this pool of data and this ecosystem that we're seeing among all of these providers, the non-traditional segment is going to start to be able to tap into that ecosystem and drive the outcomes for partners. In particular, ACE, as I mentioned, is a partner we've been working very closely with, and understanding from them how do we give credit earners, in particular, their endorsed programs are eligible for college credit. And so when we look at this next to a larger pool of other higher education opportunities as well as employment opportunities, this is going to give a lot more opportunity for earners and even employers who are issuing these credentials to see where they all fit in and where they can point people to get more value out of that. So that's something we are going to hope to connect with ACE on and do some early testing with that. We're really excited about that. And then again, what's coming next is, we're really focusing a lot on these employer and association-centric outcome models. And we think that this non-traditional part of the pool that we've been seeing in particular is going to be growing quite quickly, and we're excited about the value that a partnership and an integration with Credential Registry can bring to our issuers and our earners. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Great presentation. With each one of these presentations, I learned something new each time. So wonderful. It looks like you'll have a question after the presentations as well. And I'm just going to continue to encourage comments and questions. We love questions, so put them in the chat. And let me go ahead and move on to the next presentation. Parchment. And so I'd like to introduce Jason Weaver, Director of Product Management with Parchment. Jason, can you take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie, and thanks to the entire Credential Engine team for this session and everybody who's made the time to attend or view the recording. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Parchment is a digital credentials platform, and we allow issuers both in the academic and professional credentialing spaces to take the credentials that they used to issue as paper and to transform those into connected digital credentials. Thousands of issuers and verifiers use Parchment services today, including registrars and admissions offices across the country, licensing boards, employers, and verification agencies. We also partner with agencies at the state level, such as the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, who wants to enhance credentialing on a statewide basis. The problem Parchment helps solve is that traditional credentialing is limited. Credentials issued on paper generally aren't provided in real time. In this demonstration, we'll talk a little bit about Vincennes University in Indiana as an example of how an organization can enhance their credentialing along with Parchment and the integration with Credential Engine. But traditionally, diplomas and certificates issued on paper often don't make it into the hands of learners for weeks or even months after they've completed a program. Once they are received, paper credentials don't do a good job of communicating what the learner actually knows. What does it mean to hold a certificate in the completion of behavioral sciences? Or what competencies have I gained by completing my associate's arts degree? The tremendous value of data being published in the Credential Engine Registry documents what credentials are available at an institution. And what Parchment's platform does is take that information from an organizational level detail and bring it down to the individual. So our pros solution is enhancement to the Parchment Award Service using data from Credential Engine. So the Parchment Award Service allows credential issuers to create digital versions of their traditional credentials along with emerging forms of credentials like badges. Learners are notified by the institution through email and SMS that they can access, share, and store their credentials via Parchment. And Parchment Award will connect these portable digital credentials to data in the Credential Registry as a source of linkage. And that can include really important information like competencies that were demonstrated to earn the credential. Those linked credentials are richer. They're standards-based through the CTL data, and they can dynamically make more information visible both to learners and to verifiers. So here's how it works. First of all, an institution would provide information about what learners have earned credentials, and we would have linked those credentials to data within the registry. In my example here, Jessica has earned her Associates of Nursing diploma at Vincennes. And so Vincennes provides that information to Parchment, and Jessica receives an email message and a text with information about how to access her credential. When she enters the Parchment application, she'll go through a branded experience for Vincennes where she can authenticate with her credentials, either that she's used before on Parchment or those that are provided by her institution. Once we've authenticated Jessica, we'll bring her right in the opportunity to share her digital credentials socially. So she can see a preview of what her degree at her diploma looks like, and with a single click be able to share that credential on Facebook, or to add it to her professional profile on LinkedIn. Wherever she chooses to share her credential, Jessica is not only starting a social conversation about the issuer brand that gets likes and comments, but she's also linking her profile to an official credential that's verifiably issued by the institution through a single click. That integration also works with Twitter, and the credential can be downloaded to use offline as a PDF. So here's the PDF version. And again, like all of the social sharing, there's a link where a verifier can go through a single-click verification process. So wherever that learner chooses to display her credentials, she'll be able to direct employers and other verifiers back to an in-depth interactive version, which looks like this. So first, there's a traditional view of her credential, and here we can see the complete detail of the verification of Jessica's Associate of Nursing diploma from Vincennes. The credential evidence section allows me as a verifier to go in more in depth and see the information that's published to the Credential Registry. This allows me to see whatever additional data about this credential has been published. And as a verifier, I can learn more about Vincennes. I can learn what the ASN program that Jessica completed includes at a program level. I can also learn about Jessica's competencies. And this is what we think is really important. When we think about how an employer will evaluate a candidate, if I'm recruiting Jessica, I've not had an experience with the nursing program at Vincennes previously. This is how I can discover as an employer that their program emphasizes nursing judgment and quality improvement. Those competencies really resonate with my company's goals, so I can immediately have indicators that Jessica may be a good fit for the job I'm trying to fill. I can also find detailed information about the quality assurance of the credential, what the required learnings were to earn this diploma, and perhaps even what assessments were involved. All of this enhances what I can know about an individual based on their credentials. As an employer, it's easier for me to understand what a digital credential means and verify what the learner knows. So Parchment Award makes credentials multidimensional and real-time. That integration with Credential Engine allows the data within the registry to be displayed dynamically, which really adds an important depth to credentials. And it's that depth that allows learners to be able to access and share not only what credentials they've earned, but what those credentials represent about their knowledge, skills, and competencies. Viewers have that immediate real-time access to understand what a credential represents, and verifiers can trust that they have institutionally sourced data about the specific learning objectives that an earner has demonstrated in completion of their credentials.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Fantastic presentation.
Jeannie, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. And again, everyone who's typing in questions, keep the questions coming. We are going to address them. We have one more presentation. And so I would like to go ahead and introduce Anne Valentine, President of SmartCatalog. Anne, can you take it away?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We are really pleased to be here and be a part of what Credentials Engine is doing. We recognize it as a really important step forward in making credentials transparent and publishing them. And the following is about where we would participate in that. SmartCatalog is an academic content management system, and we help client institutions manage catalogs, curriculum, and syllabus. And in that effort, we build and maintain relational databases of academic content. Specifically for this discussion, those databases include the granular information about the required learning for each program or degree. Additionally, those databases can include key descriptions of general education and core requirements. Whoops. So if you were to look at something in our system, you would see the major requirements, which lists in great detail exactly what is required for each student to complete the program or degree. The problem first that we're solving is when students and other stakeholders compare program requirements, today they have to navigate into each individual college website, spelunk there to dig into the catalog and then find the official requirements for each program. They would have to do that for each program in each college. And the Credentials Engine will make it possible for users to see and compare multiple programs from multiple colleges. The second part of the problem is how does that stuff get into the Credentials Engine, and this is where we can help. Right now, if an institution elects to include their credentials in CE, they have to type them in. Obviously time-consuming, obviously, you know, a lot of our clients have very low staffing today. So the other aspect of that effort is that program requirements change every single year. So you have to keep it current. Our solution will be to create an upload of program requirements from our databases directly to the Credentials Engine. The upload will also be repeatable so that whenever program requirements are updated and approved on the campus side, the user can upload them to CE programmatically. And the upload will come directly from the catalog database, which is the approved official document, and it would go to the Credentials Engine team in a block of JSON. We would begin by mapping our information to the CTDL term for that aspect of the credential. And then once the information has been mapped and a user is in our system, we will deploy a function or a feature in our system, which is circled right here, which would allow the user to hit that and expose the data immediately. We will then confirm the export, and then we'll also confirm its accuracy, because we only deal in official documents of record for the colleges. Nothing can be exported until it's been through the final phase of workflow approval. So we will confirm its accuracy prior to exporting all the way to the Credentials Engine. This means that no unapproved content or content that's pending changes can be sent to CE. We then will validate the data against the recommended values of the Credentials Engine. We will confirm the export, and then we will provide that block of JSON, which CE will pull into the system via their own API. The benefits to partners and stakeholders are, one, saving staff time. By uploading information directly from the catalog, the user knows they're getting the right information, the accrediting information, and they don't have to do it manually. It also means that they can include that really critical core and gen ed requirements. And the other thing is, as it's updated annually, they're going to get the most recent updates, but they can also store archived updates, because as often the case with transfer of credits, you don't just need the most recent update or the most recent credential. You need past credentials so that you can see what the student was responsible for completing when they actually were engaged in the education. I will just finish by saying there's another way that we can work with Credentials Engine, which is that SmartCatalog not only holds data for our client colleges and universities who use our software, we also hold catalog data for over 3,200 institutions through our website, degreedata.com. That is an ongoing effort to scrape, maintain, and archive all the college catalog data in the U.S. So that is how we can participate in both ways, and we're very
Thank you, Anne. Fantastic presentation.
So. Thank you, Jean.
Thanks again to all of our presenters for putting together their presentations today. And what I'd like to do now is go on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So those of you who typed in questions to specific presenters, I'm going to go ahead and have the presenters field those questions. So I'll repeat the question and then ask the presenter to go ahead and answer them. In the meantime, while I'm doing that, if others come up with more questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Also, we can unmute, and so if anybody would like to, ask a question via the phone or via their microphone, they could have that opportunity as well. So maybe if you're afraid of interrupting, but you want to speak, if you'd like to put a little note in the chat saying that you'd like to, verbalize a question, let us know. Otherwise, once you hear a pause, feel free to ask a question. So let me jump back to earlier in the webinar, and Matt, when you were presenting, Louis Soares had a question. What end user would find the system that you were describing in your presentation and your solution a must-have? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so the Training Provider Outcomes Toolkit is really helpful for organizations that either want to or are required to connect program participation and credential attainment data to wage and employment outcomes. So especially if this requires linking individual level data on program participation with things like UI wage records. This is a complex and challenging problem because it's multi-party by its very nature and super sensitive. And so a lot of the folks that are using it are communities that consist of lead agencies like state departments of higher education and state workforce agencies that already have to do this for things like Perkins and Viola reporting, and they're finding that using this toolkit allows them to do that easier, faster, and more importantly, to expose that data in a way that automatically connects with and registers on through Credential Engine. So you get those outcomes.
Thank you, Matt. Well, let us know you can
Does that
give us a thumbs up or put a little note in the chat, or feel free to speak if your audio is connected. And it looks like Lois is typing in there. And I'll tell you what, in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next couple of questions. And Robbie, these questions are for you. The first question came from Neil, who wanted to ask about how wages and outcomes could be used as evidence of attainment. So that was the first question. Do you want to go ahead and take that one, and then we could move on to the next question from Kenneth.
Sure. So I don't know specifically the extent to which wages can be used as evidence of achievement, but certainly job positions and job actions can be used as evidence of achievement. So in an ideal world, when someone is working on a day-to-day basis and completes a task, that task would be correlated with competencies, which would then be recorded as evidence that those competencies have been demonstrated.
Okay, thank you. And then Kenneth asked, will this tool allow users to see what careers are possible based on competence they already have? Gave an example. I have 2 to 4 competencies needed to be a IT support staff member, or I should say 2/4 or a half, but 3/4 are for another field. So can you talk a little bit about that, Robbie?
Yeah. Sure. So the short answer is yes. The idea is to be able to explore career pathways based on your competencies. The search that we've actually built to date does sort of list the various credentials, at least, that in order, and you can sort them by how prepared you are for them.
Thank you. Okay, and Sarah, the next question that came in from John was for you. How does Credly define non-traditional provider?
Sure. Yeah. When I was using that as part of the presentation, it was really to differentiate it from kind of traditional institutional education. So as opposed to K-12, higher ed, which have, more normally defined credential structures and data structures. This is speaking to, where I say non-traditional, I mean organizations like corporate training, associations, assessment providers, internships, that kind of thing, as opposed to those institutions.
Right. Thank you, Sarah. And as questions continue to come in, we'll grab those questions so we can address them. But the next question that came in was for you, Jason, and it was from Christine, who asked, is Parchment geared towards traditional university students, or does it have implications for professional and continued learning?
Thanks, Jeannie. So, Christine, I used a very traditional academic example in terms of the diploma from Vincennes, but Parchment's platform is really about credentialing any type of organizational credential. So we work as closely with registrars' offices as we do with offices of continuing and professional education, and the same kind of model applies. Basically, any credential that's published in the Credential Engine, we can represent
Thank you, Jason.
in the way I demonstrated.
So it looks like possibly the next set of questions that came in are kind of general questions, and so presenters can chime in. I think some will be for Credential Engine team members, and Scott, I know you're on and would like to volunteer to answer some questions. So if you have your audio on, I'll let you answer some of those questions that came in about the Credential Engine. But let's see, Nick wanted to know if anyone is aligning competency definitions across credentials, and if so, is it possible to search by competencies alone, and thinking of the possibility of utilizing for cross-sector career transfers, that when a person shows competencies that can cross to other sectors. So I think that there's a part of what Robbie was showing with the pathways idea. And so, Nick, what we want to enable are systems and applications to be able to do this kind of thing where currently it's a bit challenging. So that is the idea, to be able to align competency definitions across credentials. And Robbie or others might want to add to that a little bit. Robbie or any of the other presenters, do you have any? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Robbie. So I think we've discussed this within in our work with the Credential Engine team fairly extensively, and one of the next steps is being able to make those alignments as people enter the credentials. And I noticed there are some organizations here, ICE and others, that do some of these crosswalks, and we're hoping to be able to leverage those as well as leveraging some of the other perhaps automated techniques and manual techniques and other kinds of ideas as to make it as easy as possible, so that when somebody enters a competency in their own framework, that it looks for ones in other frameworks. At least that's the idea now. I'm not saying that that's exactly what's going to be implemented, but that's what we've been discussing internally.
Another question that came in, the companies presented here today is credentialing a component of the platform already offered? And I'm going to go ahead and answer that. So the Credential Engine launched just last week on December 7th, and part of that launch was announcing that the technologies that will support the kinds of concepts being presented today are now available. So these presentations show the beginning stages of planning for those types of uses and integrations. So they are not implemented yet. This is the beginning point of that, basically that trajectory going forward. And the next question that came in was, is the data input drawn from national sources, or does it include international sources as well? So initially, the credentialing information that is in the Credential Registry is based out of the United States. Of course, many of those credentials are valid on an international basis. So they're offered or issued in the U.S., but can be used by people around the world. The goal of the Credential Engine is to have the credentials offered in the United States, but also to open it up internationally. And so credentials from other countries could be included with the registry as well. Scott, do you have any things to add?
No, thank you. I think you captured it perfectly. We do estimate that with the 300,000+ credentials here in the U.S., we wanted to get a good start on collecting those and publishing those to the registry. However, next year we are going to start the process of identifying the best strategies to move ahead on collecting credentials that are offered by organizations located outside of the United States. So we will begin that process next year.
Great, thank you. Scott Cheney is the Credential Engine's the Executive Director, and Scott, you might have some insights on the next question as well. The question is whether or not Credential Engine has plans of working with local workforce.
Yeah, thank you. And the answer is yes. We do plan on finding the right way to integrate not just with the local workforce offices, but with some of the state workforce development agencies. So a couple of different ways One, we are looking to, and as one of the examples Matt had, is to figure out how best we can provide better information, better data to both the state workforce system as well as to the local offices and the one-stops, so that there is better information in front of those job and career counselors as they're trying to provide resources for the job seekers day in and day out. We also think, as Matt referenced, that helping with the eligible training provider list and other credential requirements under some of the federal and state laws will be a great benefit. So we are beginning those conversations and are encouraged by where those might go.
Thank you, Scott. And it looks like the next set of comments that came in were originated from Louis and were directed toward Matt. And I know, Matt, you also have a little some conversation going in the chat. So the question was sort of how much would they pay, I guess referring to the clients that you would work with, Matt, and then Lois said trying to understand individual value propositions that would drive app development off the CE data. So let me just comment on the second part, and then Matt, I'll turn it over to you to see if there's additional comments on questions concerning your part of the presentation. But that was exactly the idea of today, was to kick off just thinking about across all the different types of systems and applications that serve different types of audiences, different types of purposes, how can the credential engine data and technologies help enable benefits to those systems and applications and the consumers, the customers of those systems. Matt, any other comments on the questions that came in?
Yeah, just briefly, I would say the primary use case driving a lot of the adoption of the toolkit that helps connect credentials with outcomes is collections of use cases around enabling people to make better decisions based on credential ROI, or return on investment. And we know that future wages and employment are only one potentially fairly narrow measure of ROI, but at least it's a start. And so a lot of the institutions, as well as the state agencies that are using some or all of the toolkit are interested in enabling future applications that can aid individual decision-making around ROI for credential investment and choice. And then the question on payment, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of the tools in the training provider outcomes toolkit are open source and for real instances. They are free to use under a very permissive license called Apache 2.0. And we actually do have states that are taking some or all of the tools and deploying them themselves without having to pay.
So another question that came in is, since degree programs, certification programs, mocks, curriculum are unique, does Credential Engine data reflect competencies and quality assurances listed, or is Credential Engine also looking to standardize competencies in industry education? So the Credential Engine credential transparency description language provides a vocabulary for describing any types of credentials and related information, including quality assurance and types of quality. What is behind that credential, for example? So that's inherent in the descriptors, and that data is accepted into the Credential Registry. And it also describes competency frameworks and the granularity of competencies at any level within a framework. And so the Credential Engine's role is to provide the descriptors or the vocabulary for consistently describing credentials and related information such as competency, quality assurance. It is not our aim at this time to standardize competencies in industry education. So what we would foresee is more opportunities because of the improved access to the data and related information, where networks can begin to organize and offer up suggestions or criteria for standardizing competencies, but that's not the role of Credential Engine. And if Scott has any comments on that, he might feel free to offer them.
I don't have anything to add, just to reemphasize that our job right now is to standardize how we can describe credentials and competencies, but not to actually standardize the competencies themselves. We're really about trying to bring that transparency to what is there, and then let the market have a better idea about what should be done in order to improve the market, not to have us do that in the market's place.
Thank you, Scott. And then we have a question, will there be a soft skills assessment piece? So as part of the Credential Transparency Description Language, or CTDL, assessments can be described. Assessments can be, for anything really that has to do with credentials, whether it's soft skills or ethics, as some people may refer to soft skills, academic skills, technical skills. So it's not specific to any one aspect of a credential. And so I believe that is already covered. And also, just as a point of clarification, when we use the word competencies and competency framework, we're using that inclusive to also include, say, learning objectives. In K-12, you all often hear about learning standards. The framework, the descriptors in the framework are applicable regardless of whether or not it's a competency framework, it's learning standards for K-12, learning objectives for liberal arts, and so forth. And so soft skills or ethics are certainly supported by the Credential Transparency Description Language, and that type of information can be included in the Credential Registry. And then Jonathan, no, your question is definitely on base. And so it was, if we're talking about searches of competencies, would the system support micro-credentials? The answer is yes. So the Credential Engine, through research, has identified the current kind of state of credentials or types of credentials commonly found in the United States, and certainly micro-credentials is one of those. We certainly anticipate the ever-changing market to introduce new types of credentials as well. And so the CTDL and the registry will support credentials that we're aware of, or types of credentials that we're aware of now, and new and emerging credentials, both in the U.S. or offered overseas as well. And let's see. Yeah, and then, lots of great comments and conversations I see going in there in the chat. Thank you for all of your, ideas, thoughts, comments, questions. What we hoped to accomplish today was to introduce, some concepts that can be realized. So all of the concepts that were presented in the PowerPoints today can be implemented with Credential Engine data. So your ideas are welcome, and this is not the last webinar for a showcase. We have an additional date set that we'll talk about in just a moment, and make sure that you get the information to register for the next webinar. But we suspect that we will have, several webinars over time, where we can then bring on more ideas across the spectrum of types of services for consumers, systems, and applications, and then begin to also demonstrate those concepts. Did I miss any questions? Valerie, I see you asked a question, do we plan to share? Oh yeah, definitely. As a follow-up, we will send a link to the archive webinar. We could also include the PowerPoint presentation. If anyone thinks of any questions afterwards, you can, feel free to pass those on to us as well, and we'll do our best to answer them. Let's see. Okay. I, had mentioned earlier that, those of you who were on the phone or on microphones could also feel free to speak. I want to make sure you get a chance. I'll just pause for a moment here and see if any other questions come up. Okay. Well, not hearing any questions over the phone or microphone, and I'm hoping I didn't miss any on from the chat. If I did, somebody please just let me know so we can get them answered. Otherwise, again, thank you to our fantastic presenters who, really spent quite a bit of time with the Credential Engine team looking at use cases and how we can work together to support those use cases. We're looking forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you to all of you who were able to join us today. We so appreciate you taking the time. Our next showcase is, Scarlett, isn't it January 18th? Can you put the date in the chat as well? Make sure I have that right. We have a couple of confirmed presentations. We certainly expect to have more. These are just the confirmed. We have quite a list, actually, of potential presentations to look forward to. So please do go ahead and register for the January showcase and stay tuned for the addition of other presenters that will be included with that showcase. Watch for a date in February as well. And for more information, please visit the Credential Engine website and follow us on social media. You can subscribe to our news and updates through the main website, credentialengine.org, and stay tuned for additional participation opportunities. And let me see if Scott or any of the other presenters have anything they want to add.
No, I have nothing to add other than thank you to all of the 6 partner organizations today and for everyone taking the time to join us. We really appreciate everyone's interest in what we're doing.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Looking forward to talking to you soon.